Welcome back to the What We Do in the Shadows podcast on the Nothing Notable podcast. I'm Tyler.
I'm Daniel.
And today we're talking about the season 3 finale, The Portrait. The housemates grieve the loss of one of their own. I'll start with my overall thoughts because you usually start, Dan.
Hell yeah.
I really enjoyed this. I watched this at 5 a.m. in the morning this morning because that's the only time I could have it.
The perfect time for comedy, some have said.
Yeah, it's actually perfect time for comedy. You being like, God, I gotta watch this. But I watched it. And I really enjoyed this episode. I think it's one of the strongest of the season. I think with everything we were talking about in the last series, or the last episode, I should say, with just like all the Colin Robinson stuff, I think this does show like what the show's going to be, and I'm really excited about it. I'm also really excited at the prospect of what the season finale leaves for the viewer and how season 4 is going to pick up. But yeah, what are your overall thoughts, Daniel?
I've got two thoughts to start with. The first is that the season 2 finale was like a perfect plot finale. The season 3 finale is a perfect character finale because it really focuses heavy on the characters and it totally lets all of the other stuff go away. Part 2 of my opening thought here. A finale has to wrap up the season, but also has to create the promise of what's to come.
Yeah.
And I think that this creates a very exciting promise. All season long, we've been talking about like, what does the show want to be? Does it want to be A or does it want to be B? And I think we were right to approach it in that way, but what the show taught me in this episode is that it can have it both ways.
It can, yeah.
And that's what I want. That's exactly what I want, and I didn't know I wanted it that way this whole time.
Really excited about that, because again, we're going to still... I think last season's finale is a perfect example how they could just reset and like nothing happened. Like at the end of last season, you're like, holy shit, what's going to happen?
Right.
Like there's no way they can get away, and then they got away with it,
yeah.
And it was fine. But overall, yeah, let's start at the beginning. The portrait. Everyone's getting a portrait, and Guillermo's like they're doing this so they're like escaping their feelings and stuff. And there's a lot of really good bits with just everyone just standing and being like, I think Nandor's explanation of it was like, we used to have a picture with Colin Robinson and now he's dead. So we will get a new picture without Colin Robinson and move on with our lives. And like, that is just such a funny way of like looking at life. And the thing is like, if you're an eternal vampire, like that's kind of how it goes. And I think one of the funnier reveals of this episode was the person painting the portrait was Donald Logue.
Coming off the bench again.
From last episode.
He's on a hot streak.
And he's really good in this. And like, I think his bit last time was that like, he's a vampire, but the bit this time is like, he's Donald Logue and a vampire. Like the bit last time was like, he's Donald Logue, but like, he's a vampire is the main bit. And is like, that's a punchline. But this one, he's like, oh no, he's still doing all the same stuff, but he's a vampire. He's like talking about auditions and stuff. And that's just really funny. And how he... Yeah, I'll just get into Donald Logue right now. He would take pictures of people and then paint them. And then I think the best part was he painted a portrait of a grip, just like someone who like
it just works on the set,
the boom and shit. Yeah. He just works on the set, and he's like, I just couldn't stop staring at him the whole time. And
I think it really captured his essence, you know?
Yeah, and just a guy is the thing. There's only a lot of him at the beginning because they know they have to do so many other things, so they give him like a whole monologue at the beginning. It's really funny, and also like. The end of the bit is that he just keeps talking.
Yeah.
And then everyone gets so annoyed with him just because he's like talking so much just about the most random shit. But again, funny cameo, and I'm glad he came back in 2 episodes in a row.
He's really good to the point where I was considering, let's back up the Brinks truck for Donald Logue to be a regular reoccurring character on the show, because he's really good. Like, he's very funny, and his bit is quite funny. One, just the performance is like engaged, I think is the appropriate word, because often you'll get a cameo performance. We talked about this last time, but like you'll get a cameo performance and it doesn't feel like they get the show. It doesn't feel like they're totally engaging with the material. They just sort of show up and take the money and then leave and then go on and do another show. They do another 2-episode arc on SVU.
Yeah.
But in this case, Donald Logue is like really understanding the bit and really committing to it. But also, I just think that the specificity of the painting bit is so funny when he talks about like how he took a picture of it and then painted from the picture. And he's like, but that's how most of the masters today do it. And like just the fact that he has that level of knowledge of painting and like he's the language that he's using about it. It's the specificity there is what makes it really funny.
Totally. I just realized a character didn't appear this season that I absolutely love. And we'll talk about, I think at the end, we'll talk about like some stuff we wanted to see more of this season or less of. I think this was a really great season. I wouldn't rank the seasons. I think they're all good and different in their own way. But there are a couple things that this season did break the pattern of that I saw in season 1 and 2. And that's, that's a lot of fun. And I'm excited to see where it goes from here, really. So continuing on with the episode, this episode starts branching off into Nandor wanting to leave, Nadja getting a good position, and then kind of slowly you're realizing that the gang is going to spread apart and they're going to leave. And that makes sense, like I think Colin Robinson was a big part of the group. And like, while they don't say it, like this is a big reason why they're leaving. Like, Nandor is like, thinking like maybe he should travel the world more and stuff like that, which is like funny for a vampire who's lived like hundreds of years. But Nadja got this new promotion too, and she wants to move to England. And then, Laszlo couldn't be fucked, so he doesn't want to go back to England. And I guess we can talk about Matt Berry for a bit, because he does play the Toast of London
unbelievable
intro song / Take My Hand, which is just like a song he wrote. And it's so funny. It's like the little ditty he's playing while like Guillermo walks in and he's like, can you believe like Nadja's going to England and blah, blah, blah. And Laszlo's all like, there's no way I'm ever going back to England, like ever in my whole life, ever. It was just, it's an interesting point in this episode when everyone just starts splitting up. And I think it speaks to like how, I don't know, just like how delicate I think any friend group is. Mm-hmm. And like, I think if someone died like that, like totally your friend group would start thinking of doing other things. Cause like there's only so much you can do in one area. And I'm really happy they kind of tackled that, because that's more of a serious topic, but they tackled it in a very fun and interesting way, I think.
The thing about the sitcom is that we love all these characters, but we love these characters together. And we've been talking about pairings and how that's a great part of sitcoms all season. But what the season has been doing is slowly taking those characters away from each other and showing them as individuals instead of as a collective. And so we're getting Nandor's depression and his desire for connection. We're getting the Guillermo, the opposite side of that story, basically, with Guillermo. And then we're getting Nadja, who wants to be a working woman in modern America. And then we get Laszlo, who couldn't be fucked all season, but as we learn later, had quite a season, actually, quite a caring season. But so all of these characters are getting sort of spread apart, and we're getting to see them as individuals, which is not common of sitcoms. Like, obviously we love characters in sitcoms, but again, we love them together. We don't love them apart, because usually they can't handle their own storylines apart. I mean, the great example of this is Joey. Yeah. Right? The show that got made after Friends, where they tried to take Matt LeBlanc's character from Friends and then make an entire show about that. They were going to do that with Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother. Mm-hmm. But what's been great about this season is they've been able to sort of baby step that, and they've been able to show them as individuals and allow them to grow and develop within their own character arcs. And again, the promise of season 4 is that we'll get a little bit more of that before they come back together. Yeah, totally. And like, it could even just be the first couple episodes or even the first episode. But the thing is, it's like they are apart for a little bit. And that's pretty interesting, because I think we reached a breaking point this season. And to get it a little more serious, I think, again, like you said, like everyone is dealing with their own stuff. And this was going to happen eventually. Like, there's no way like Guillermo could like continue just like living this life, and same with Nandor, and same with like not everyone besides Laszlo, pretty much. Like again, Laszlo couldn't be fucked. But again, he has a pretty interesting character arc this season as well. And I think this episode does a really good job of like seeing those character arcs through. Nandor is finally traveling the world. He's going to see some stuff. And for the first time in his life, he is alone. Mm-hmm. No Guillermo. And then Nadja's, going on, becoming more of a leader. She's like dedicated, motivated. And then like, again, Laszlo, while he said this whole season, like he couldn't be fucked, like, first of all, he can be, definitely can be, but he is taking these steps and being like a better person. And he like actually found a friend this season in Colin Robinson.
and he's going to help that friend grow up in a weird way. Like that's why they had to focus on him and Colin Robinson all this season, because like they're gonna like their next storyline is like combined, It's going to be really interesting and weird. I was talking to you about this off mic, but I guess we'll get into the Colin Robinson baby stuff a bit.
Sure.
Again, this is all spoilers, but at the end of the episode, and we'll talk about Laszlo in a bit, like what he does before this, but he finds a baby Colin Robinson, and I think the hint is that he's gonna take care of him this whole season, and he's gonna take care of someone who's weak because he's strong. And it's really interesting. And I'm excited to see, and it reminded me of how Groot died in Guardians of the Galaxy 1.
Right. And
then he came back as a baby in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And I think that spoke to them more or less as a family. And I think this is really interesting as it only speaks to Laszlo being a father figure. It doesn't speak to any of the other ones, because I'm sure all of them would take care of Colin Robinson. But I think Nandor's way too depressed, and Nadja needs to do the Vampiric Council stuff. So like Laszlo's the odd man out, and I think it makes sense for him to take on the parenting role. And I'm very excited to see how he grows, because I think he's been a lot of things over the centuries, but I don't think he's ever been a father.
Right.
So I'm interested to see him do that.
Damn,
look at me.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
The whole thing about Laszlo is that he doesn't care. And this episode pulled the rug out from under us and revealed he truly does. And we've gotten glimpses of that within Jackie Daytona. Like he can care about things, and sometimes it doesn't make sense why, but it never makes sense why anyone cares about anything, And so there's the whole he's going to take care of the baby thing. There's also the reason that he was kicked out of England, which was that he decided to marry Nadja, who was a peasant girl who had no surname, which I just thought was really funny, because like they've never said.
And also, and also just like that intro is just really like him like introducing that, and he's like, and I fell in love with someone, and he's like keeping it very vague, and you're like, is the joke gonna be it's not her? And then she's like, it was me, like she like cuts him off. It's like, yes, it was you, it was Nadja, your name. She's like, my name, yes, your name.
And Donald Logue is like, oh snap indeed, Donald. It's really good. No, but so there's both of those things, and both of those things actually reveal so much about Laszlo. He has this cold exterior. He acts like he doesn't care, but he truly does. He cares about the people that are in his life, and going forward, I think that it's a really great opportunity to continue to add more of that depth and more of those layers to Laszlo, because early in the season, we love Laszlo. Your favorite character.
My favorite character, yeah. I mean, I love Matt Berry, but
he's amazing. But early in the season, we kind of were, whether we explicitly said it on the podcast or not, we were a little bit worried just because like he was a bit one note, not in the performance, but the character. It was just like all pornography. And we learned,
and they do a nice callback to that too. But
right.
Go for it though.
Not only was that to help Colin Robinson in his dying days, but it was also to get to this point, which is to reveal that he's not the character that we thought he was this whole time.
Yeah,
like that is a big piece of him. That is his attitude, but it's not his character.
I think a perfect example of that in this episode, balancing that, is like they make a joke when they're leaving, and they're like, oh, like don't forget about the 3 briefcases of like pornography. Like, oh, it's like, okay, yeah, that's like still definitely like a Laszlo thing. And then when he's on the docks, and Nadja just got put in, and it's just him and Guillermo. And Guillermo's like, why do you have all these like Oreos and like this other stuff? And he's like, oh, that's like really like pricey, like in London. And you're like, oh, that's just like a weird Laszlo thing.
Yeah.
But that's just like him giving food to Guillermo for the trip. And that's just really funny. Again, it's a sweet thing, and I think it's a huge character turn, and I'm really happy they did that, because I think the whole season we were kind of like, Laszlo seems kind of one note, but they were saving it till the end, which is very good writing.
And it's going to make the rewatch totally different. Also, knowing where we end up, it's going to be a completely different experience. If we were to say that this was one character's season, I would say it's more Nandor's season than anyone else, but it really does like turn the season on its head, and it really turns the character of Laszlo on its head. And I commend them for that, because you have something that works so well, which is this like uncaring bastard of a character in Laszlo, and he still will get to be that, but let's soften him up. Let's sweeten him up a little bit. It seemed impossible, because part of the joke of the show is the lack of growth of these vampires.
Yeah.
Because they live forever.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, let's talk about a couple of other of the characters. Nandor and Guillermo get into a fight.
Loved it.
In this episode, it was an awesome sequence. Especially when like at the end, like Guillermo's like, okay, I'm gonna get my things, and then Nandor's like, man, that guy like really moves when he like wants to move. Like,
Yeah.
he's like and it was a fun fight because it was like a nice back and forth, and I don't think either character really won, which is like what you want to do with fights like that. But again, I think this speaks to what we've been talking about this whole season. Guillermo obviously like has some sort of deep affection for Nandor, and Nandor him. And it was a really sweet moment where Nandor's like, you can come with me and I'm going to give you everything you wanted. Like when we're like at this river in my home country, like I'll make you a vampire. And like that is again ripped under us when Laszlo has his own plans for it all. But it was a really sweet moment between Guillermo and Nandor, I think. And for a relationship that has been so like toxic is like an understatement, like up and down and all around. Like it's nice to know that they came to an agreement this episode. Like that's kind of what bothered me about last episode. I feel like Nandor and like Guillermo weren't really resolved. It was like them just fighting the whole time. Nandor was being a little childish. Guillermo was also being a little childish, but they really came together in this episode. And I'm excited to see what happens next season, because like from Nandor's perspective, he did get left behind by Guillermo. So it is really interesting to see that. But again, it's one of the most interesting dynamics in this series, and I'm glad that it's going to be a little longer till that's ever resolved.
It's really becoming the Jim Pam will they won't they thing, whatever that means.
Yeah,
it's just like where are they going to go, and when are they going to get there is a crucial question that we're always asking. And I love when go for it.
I was just gonna say it's essentially like the end of Barry season 2. You're like, where do you go from here? Like you wrote yourself in a corner, and that's something the writers about that show always talk about. It's like they love writing themselves into corners where they have no other choice.
Right.
And like I think What We Do in the Shadows does this very well as well.
I agree, and that's what separates it from the other sitcoms is like they write themselves into situations that they can't totally come back from. They did reset after the season 2 finale, but not totally. It's still the Van Helsing within Guillermo is still a crucial piece of the puzzle, and it does set up the Vampiric Council stuff, which then sets up Nadja's ability to become a part of the England chapter of the worldwide Vampiric Council. So like these things have consequences and things happen, of course. But what I love about the Guillermo Nandor relationship is like I love when Guillermo fights back and Nandor takes it. I think that speaks to a lot of their relationship as well, because like it's seemingly like the power dynamic is that Nandor has all of the power, but even though Guillermo uses this line out of like anger and frustration, not so much out of sincerity, there is a truth to it when he says that the only reason that you're alive is because I allow you to be, because I am a vampire hunter. He's saying that because he's hurt, but there's also truth to that, because like he and Guillermo he and Nandor really can tag each other back and forth, and Guillermo can't tag Nandor as much as he can tag Guillermo, but still he can tag him a little bit, and no one else can do that. That's why that there is that deep affection going both ways, not just one way. That's why they are going to end up together at some point, whatever together means.
And that's an exciting, again, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like, that's an exciting thing, because it's a will they, won't they, but it's like, what does that mean? It's like, will they become vampires, or will they be lovers? Will they, will Guillermo figure out a way to make Nandor human again? Like there's so many things. And it's a very interesting dynamic because again, Nandor is such an old being. And it's just really interesting because Guillermo's just some guy. I will say I thought it was interesting when Guillermo's like, I can't just like pack up and go.
Right, his mom's
like, I have to take care of my mom. I have a bunch of stuff. And then like all of a sudden he was like, just kidding, I can. Doug Jones is in this episode.
Yes, I wanted really to go back to the portrait stuff because there's so much there. There's the Doug Jones, and there's the Sire, and there's the Hellhound. There's also a couple of lines that I want to shout out. But like when we first see them, I was just tickled with joy because we just get to have Doug Jones and a giant troglodyte monster vampire called the Sire and a golden retriever whenever we want. Whenever we want to have them, we can have them. And Doug Jones has like 2 or 3 or 4 really funny lines in this one. One is when they're all sitting down and he like laughs at the joke that Nadja makes, and he's like, "Oh, that was a good one." Also, I feast on hate. It's just like he's like a evil being,
yes.
and that's inherently funny. And again, the look of the charred skin and everything, the fact
how
that
he has one arm now,
he's got
like
one
this is
arm.
like talk about a new normal, you know?
Exactly. And then later, also the bit about the sire learning English is so funny.
And it's just so funny to have such an evil being like the Baron just not being able to do anything.
Yeah.
He has one movable arm. That's it. He doesn't have any legs, anything else. It's just really funny. Yeah, and again, we'll see where the sire goes, because obviously that was planting seeds for something else, because he's just like, hey. And then he's like, oh, that's very good. That's very good.
Your English is improving. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. And then the Hellhound is in there too. And that's really funny. And besides that, let's talk about the one character we haven't talked about too much. And I know it's your favorite character, so let's talk about Nadja.
She's great in this episode. I think one thing that this episode does so well is it doesn't shortchange any of the characters. It gives everybody their time and their shine. I liked the fact that the season arc of Nadja is that she is growing as a leader, and she's becoming a more powerful vampire in the community of vampires.
Yeah, remember when she killed someone?
Yeah, she took somebody's heart out early in this season. And so they've been building up for that, or building up to that all season long. So I thought that was a smart place to finish on with Taika reappearing again. Again, just a good bit. Like, this isn't being taped on RuPaul, is it? And then at the end, RuPaul shows up for like a half of a second. Just a funny joke. But also...
And just the idea... go for it.
Also, when he's just like... when you're done, just tape your thing, tape it, and then send it back to us in an envelope, and then we'll get it in a week or whatever. It's just the way he like delivers that line is very funny.
He's like, get it to us as soon as possible after you do all these steps that make it way longer than just like sending an email or text or something.
It's very exciting for what's going to happen comedically with Laszlo and Colin Robinson, but plot wise and character wise, I think what's going to happen with Nadja is very interesting as well. Especially the pairing of her and Guillermo together, because that's not a pairing that we get very often, because Nadja just hates Guillermo. Like, she doesn't care for Guillermo whatsoever. I think Laszlo kind of has like a slight amusement towards Guillermo. He calls him Gizmo all the time, and like he sees that. I think he sees Guillermo's value sometimes. But Nadja does not. Yeah, Nadja does not, and so that's going to be a very fun odd couple pairing.
I will say I'm interested to see if Nadja and Laszlo stay together, because this is I understand like where he was coming from with what he did, but it also kind of seems like they kind of reached a breaking point with their relationship. Also, I realized just that really funny bit after like Laszlo was like, yeah, it was you. They hug, and then Nadja they're like, oh, like
right.
Nadja like felt his like erection, and then they're like, oh, let's just have sex now. And then they like, and he's like, I'm ready, and then they just run off. That was like a funny cut to the commercial break type deal. There's also the good hat bit where, sorry, I'm just remembering all the bits.
Oh, yeah, the hat. That's right.
Yeah. The hat reappears. I'm glad that's always a joke every season, the bloody cursed hat. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm also like, it would be really cool if Laszlo just wears that thing all the time now that Nadja and him like are just like way far apart. But I'm excited to see what happens with Nadja. I'm excited to see if they stay in London for a long time. And I'm really excited to see her become more of a leader, and also see some more random fun cameos throughout the series. Because that Supreme Vampire Council has to have some A-listers in there.
They're definitely going to bring in... I would imagine that Taika will be in a couple episodes, and I would imagine that they bring in a bunch of like English royalty, like legendary English comedic and dramatic actors of the stage and of television and of film to
if they could get
in.
like McKellen or someone in there, like that'd be great.
Sure, yeah.
I will say though this, and I think this can transition kind of into like what we kind of wanted to see more of this season, or some constructive criticism. I do feel like Taika's rendition of his character is always different than what it was. Like when he's in the show, it's always a different character.
Yeah.
Than it was in What We Do in the Shadows. Because I don't know, I feel like I feel like in the movie he was a lot more anal about things. Like I think his name was Viago. Yeah, I feel like Viago was always like kind of like the cleanly person and like kind of neurotic in the way that like Colin Robinson is about some things. And I feel like he never hits that quite as much. And I'm curious like what's that for? Like, is it because like maybe this is just his presentational, like he's part of like a council, or I don't know. I just kind of wanted to bring it up because I thought it was interesting, because I never feel like he's Viago from the movie. I always feel like he's like a different vampire.
Totally agree. It definitely feels, and I felt this in previous seasons too. Whenever Jermaine would show up, Jermaine Clement, close personal friend, that's why I called him Jermaine. Whenever he shows up, it felt very much of the movie. I felt like he was sort of more his character than Taika Waititi was his character. But I don't know if he is available to be in a couple episodes next season. The opportunity to have him in person, I think, will greatly help, because he'll be able to interact with more stuff. Because right now he's just like delivering lines to a Zoom camera, basically the same way that we are. But if he has people interacting with him, he can do more of that like pedantic like dusting of stuff constantly, you know, just making sure that things are hygienic and things are going according to plan, and how he wants Nadja to do her job very specifically.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's opportunity there for that.
Yeah. And I think that also stems from when he was in person in that awesome Vampire Council episode in season 1, that it was just like they didn't really spend enough time with him. So I think if he was like a fully fledged character in an episode, like the guide is, or some other like characters throughout the season, like I think it'll be fleshed out again. But it was an interesting point I thought I wanted to bring up. Anyways, other than that, I'm mad that Jeff wasn't in the season. I love Jeff. Jeff's one of the funniest characters in this series. But I guess they kind of have gone too far with it. Just because I think, I don't know, I feel like he's a ghost now, so he's not just a guy. I think the bit was really funny in season 1 and 2 when he was just a guy. And that was nothing more. But I do like that actor, and I think Jeff's just always fun to have around. I kind of wanted to see more Claude, who's Craig Robinson's character, who we haven't seen in a minute. And also Simon the Devious. I feel like
hell yeah,
we could have seen more. But I will say this about this season. I think to contrast what I wanted to see more, like I'm really glad they didn't do all that, because I think it would have felt a little too similar to the first 2 seasons. And I'm happy when shows do something brave and bold, and I think the end of the season definitely did that, because like they completely broke the formula. There's only one of them there's only 2 of them who's living in Staten Island right now, so we'll see how it all goes. But yeah, those are just a couple things I wanted to see more of.
Well, to harp on the Craig Robinson point, I definitely wanted more of that whole plot line from season 2 to be incorporated into season 3. I do feel like they just sort of left that behind a little bit too easily. The fact that Guillermo was in a vampire hunting group, and the fact that was the driving force of the entire, I mean, that was the driving force kind of, they were building up to that for 2 seasons. And the fact that they kind of just dropped it, they left it, and they only touched on it a few times here and there was a little bit disappointing. I think ultimately what they ended up with out of season 3 was amazing. We both love this season so much, but I think they could have done a better job of, in the first few episodes, just explaining a little bit more that Guillermo went down that path and decided he didn't want to continue down that path. Have Guillermo just talk straight to camera, you know, and just say like, that was where I was at emotionally, but now I realize that I still really want to be a vampire. That is still my character's goal. I think that they could have just explained that a little bit better, and it would have made it feel a little bit more natural that they leave it alone. But instead, it sort of just feels like a loose thread that hasn't been tugged at all season. By the end of season 4, what would make you say this was another bold choice that kept the show going in that upward trajectory?
Yeah, that's a good question. Great question, actually. I mean, it's hard to say that, but like, I think to reinvent the show in a big way where it's like not even like Victorian vampires anymore. Like they kind of like have been like they're more acclimated to the times is the thing. And there's more like they have cell phones and stuff. And like, I think that's like a bold direction that could bring it to an interesting way, because then you can have like a Tinder episode and stuff where they like eat people that they meet on Tinder. I think doing something like that like makes them ingrained in society might ruin the show, because it ruins the juxtaposition. Like that's a whole point of the show, but also might bring the show into an interesting new direction that we haven't seen yet.
I think that's interesting. I really like the idea of vampire Tinder. That'd be a great episode for Nandor.
Right? I mean, come on, call us.
Call us. We would love to be writers on your show. Just give us a call. Just give us one call.
That's how it happens. That's always how it's happened. You just talk about it on one of 4 billion podcasts.
That's Hollywood, baby.
And then they go, yep, that's Holly. That's how it works.
Yeah. So this whole season, some of the biggest belly laughs, some really tender emotions, and really interesting plot stuff, really interesting character stuff. I thought that this season was just really, really strong. I started off this What We Do in the Shadows podcast by saying like the king is back, and I still believe that the king remains the king. You know, the crown is still on this show's head. There's not been a comedy, for my money, that has dethroned this one yet. And there's a lot of funny shows on TV, but this is still the funniest show. Yeah,
I agree with your sentiment, and I'm really happy we got to talk about it. And I don't know, the first one's kind of picking up more views now, so that's kind of fun. And yeah, I think I really do love this season. So that's all for the What We Do in the Shadows podcast. We'll hopefully be back for season 4 next year. And yeah, I've been Tyler.
I've been Daniel.
And this has been a Nothing Notable podcast. I was gonna say something that ended the episode, but I forgot what it was. I didn't write it down.
Well, the last line of this season is Matt Berry saying shit. So
oh yeah, so shit. Yes. I don't know. We'll go watch Toast of London. Guys, watch it.
I'll play the audio out at this point.
Yeah, sounds good. Please no.